Hey guys, welcome back. Thanks so much for being here. Just got about 3.5 minutes or so until we start this meeting. So welcome back. Hope you're doing well. And we'll just be ready to go in a few here. Hey guys. Hi Oliver, how's it going? Hi Ben, welcome back. It's like a little thunderstorm going on here where I'm at in Long Beach. So just hearing some lightning and stuff outside. Thought when we got to March we are gonna get some nice warm weather, but yeah, I guess I can't complain. Welcome back, guys. Just a few minutes till 10. You have to email me your essay, Ben. I've mentioned that before. Vulich@chapman.edu. So just attach the file, send me your email. Have you done it yet? If not, do it now. I've given confirmation to all the essays that I received all the way up until 9 a.m. when I had to start teaching just an hour ago for a different class. So you would have received a confirmation from me unless you just now have submitted it within the last hour. But please do so if you haven't yet. Thank you. Hi, Zachary, Kylie, Sebastian, everybody here. Good to see you. Hi, Cordy. Hey there, Zoe. Hey, Beachy. Hello, guys. I'm hearing a lot of thunder outside. It's making Peachy a little bit nervous, but she's okay. Hello, hello. Yeah, I'm seeing some rain and thunder and stuff. Hello, guys. Hi, McKenna. Okay, we're pretty much good to go. All right, guys, so welcome back. Thanks again for your attendance and all your hard work. So it's Wednesday, the 3rd of March, and everyone knows that today is the first paper due date. So if you haven't sent it in to me yet or given me your copy, please make sure to do it. I would just ask that you email it to me. So my email address, vulich@chapman.edu. Please just go ahead and send me your essay, and now it's all done. I'll be working on grading them in the next week and a half. I'll try my best to finish them by next weekend. It just takes a little while because I want to, give detailed comments and make sure to be thorough. But the next thing that we have after that, as you look forward at the schedule, is the midterm exam. That's going to be Friday, March 19th. So we still have a couple more weeks until we get there. And between now and then, we have a couple more essays to talk about on the subject of ethics. Then I'll give you guys the study guide for the midterm, and we'll go into 2 review sessions before we have the test itself on the 19th. Then there will be the spring break holiday for a week, and then we'll return. So just giving you a couple of little updates on the overall pace and calendar. Oh yeah, Kylie, I was just saying, yes, I will give you all a study guide at least a week before the exam itself, and then we'll go over the study guide questions as a group in 2 different class meetings that are just dedicated to review. So yeah, there will be all kinds of good opportunity for you to be well prepared and to have all your questions answered so you can come in feeling good on the test day. All right, guys, so that's just a couple of quick notifications to start the class with today. You have your essays due. Make sure to send them to me if you haven't already. I've been confirming the receipt of each essay, but if you've sent it to me since 9 a.m. today, I'll have to do it after class just in a moment, so not to worry. But that's all behind us, so the class keeps moving on. One essay down, and then just another couple of things. You have 2 tests and a second essay to write later in the semester. Okay, guys, so as usual, make sure to type in a comment at some point to just keep a record of your attendance. And if you have any questions, comments, or any other thoughts, I'd love to hear them at any point. So just put them in the chat whenever. And if you have some thoughts or questions or anything at all, we'll just deal with it as it comes. Okay, then. So, good. Let's continue. We have more to do on the subject of ethics. So we took a couple of class meetings to go over 2 big ethical theories. One was the theory of utilitarianism by John Stuart Mill. That theory says that the morally good action is the action that generates the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. It was a consequentialist theory. It says happiness and pleasure is the only thing that we each pursue as an end and not as a means. And he tries to defend the position against various objections, like that it's a theory fit for swine. Some of the other objections that we mentioned at the end of that class period, like that it's too demanding or that no action is totally forbidden, are also serious and important objections to consider. Then we looked at Emmanuel Kant's ethics, Kantian ethics. He says instead that what you ought to do has nothing to do with the total amount of pleasure or consequences. Instead, you should just try to act with a good will and a good intention. And if you do that, then what you've done is morally permitted, even if the consequences were not good. So to act with a good will, you have to just act from a sense of duty to uphold the moral law. He says only acts that are done from the motive of duty have moral worth. Acts done from the motive of inclination don't have any moral worth. Think of the shopkeeper example. And then, he says that since you're supposed to act from a sense of duty to uphold the moral law, how do we figure out the moral law? He says it can be discovered through the use of reason by reflection on what's called the categorical imperative. The categorical imperative has 2 different versions. The first one we talked about says that it's only morally okay to do actions that could be willed to be a universal law. To be even more technical, act always according to that maxim, which could be a universal law. So the maxim of a person's action is a statement of what they would do in a given scenario, and the universal law version of it would just simply convert that into a statement that all people shall do that action in the same circumstance. If imagining your action as a universal law would be impossible or undesirable, then it's wrong to do for you. And the second version of the categorical imperative said that you should never treat a human being as a means, but always as an end in itself. An end is a goal. Means are things that you do to reach goals. So people should be treated as though they are goals instead of things that you use to get to your goals. And okay, so that's pretty much the summary of those authors, just to remind us. Now what we're going to do is talk about how to apply these ethical theories to the consideration of an actual moral debate that people engage in our world. And there's many moral debates, there's like abortion, death penalty, animal ethics, environmental ethics, war. But I've chosen, and it's in the book, to focus on the topic of economic inequality and global hunger. So the question that we're going to pursue and investigate is this. Do we in the first world, do we have any moral obligation to assist those that are living in absolute poverty and in hunger in the third world? You're going to see that not every philosopher has the same point of view on this question. So essentially, there are those who say, yes, we have a moral obligation to assist the global poor, and others who say, no, actually, there's no such moral obligation. And since we want to have balance in everything we do, we're going to look at arguments from both sides of that debate, starting with the side of Peter Singer. So the author for today and Friday is this man, Peter Singer. Peter Singer is an Australian philosopher who is still alive, and he's one of the most famous in the world. He was born in 1942, still going strong. And this is a paper he wrote in 1993, which is called Rich and Poor. Peter Singer, he's taught at a lot of elite institutions, Ivy League places like Princeton for a long time. And yeah, like I was saying, he's one of the most well-known worldwide in philosophy and in ethics today. In the 70s, when he was a pretty young philosopher in his 30s, he wrote a book that became kind of a classic book in ethics. and that book is called Animal Liberation. So this is not related per se to what we're talking about today, but just to give you a little bit of background on him. Animal Liberation, the book he wrote in the 70s, is considered an important landmark book because it kind of spearheaded the whole ethical and social debate concerning animals, vegetarianism, and whether factory farming is unethical. That was not a very big topic of discussion in the 70s, but today it's become a much bigger deal, and there's a lot of people who espouse vegetarianism, veganism on a moral basis. So he kind of is one of the early champions of that. In his book, Animal Liberation, it lays out a detailed argument as to why the current status quo in his argument is unethical. But he's got writings on almost every topic in philosophy, including on the inequities of economic inequality. And that's what this paper is about, Rich and Poor, from 1993. So he argues in the paper that we do have a moral obligation to divert some portion of our surplus wealth or resources to our fellow human beings living in extreme poverty. And to the extent that we don't do this, he thinks we're neglecting a moral obligation that we do have, and that's wrong. But as I said, we have, both sides of this argument. So when we finish with him next week, we will read about Garrett Hardin. Garrett Hardin takes the totally extreme opposite view, that we don't have an obligation morally to assist the global poor. And from Hardin's viewpoint anyway, it's not even beneficial in the long run. If you look at the long-range consequences of such international aid, he thinks it's not even beneficial to those that you would hope it would help. So we'll see both sides of the argument, and then you'll just be the one to determine on your own what you thought was the stronger case, etc. So Peter Singer, Australian philosopher of the current day, his paper Rich and Poor, 1993. So let's just go into it then. I can erase this part now, and we'll dive into this article. So he starts the article off by just kind of presenting to the reader basic facts about global poverty. So this much of the paper is pretty much empirical and statistical data. It's not really like a philosophical argument yet. He's just trying to give you the state of play in terms of what global poverty is. So right away in the beginning, he mentions a term that was first coined by former U.S. Defense Secretary Robert McNamara. And this coined term is absolute poverty. So what is absolute poverty? Let's get that on the table. Okay, so absolute poverty is a condition where you do not have enough income or wealth to meet even the basic human needs of food, clothing, and shelter. So that's what it is, not having enough income or wealth to meet the basic human needs of food, clothing, and shelter. That's absolute poverty. So imagine, living in a way where all the money you get from wherever you're working or whatever you can pool together from your family and other sources, that still does not meet these basic human baseline necessities. So all your money is diverted to what you need to eat, keeping clothes on your back and a place to sleep, and you have nothing left over after that. Sorry. It's always 3 for me, I can never just sneeze once. But anyway, okay. Imagine that. Imagine living that way, where your money is completely exhausted by the basic necessities of life. Thanks, Kylie. Appreciate it. Now, this is not an abstract concept. This is not just a hypothetical scenario, because this is a real-world condition right now. Even according to conservative estimates, there's about, in the year 1993, a half billion people living in this condition of absolute poverty. And the numbers range. So I think even back then, the range of estimation was 500 million to 1.2 billion. But today in 2021, the global population is significantly larger than it was in 1993. So whatever numbers and figures that he cites in this paper are significantly expanded and larger now, just due to the larger size of the global population. So we have at least 1 billion people in the world today that are living this way in absolute poverty. And certainly I would think it's probably much more, because he cites billion as a mid-range figure in 93. So in 2021, it's probably 1.5 or more. And we call it absolute poverty because this is poverty according to any human standard of basic needs. It's not like relative poverty. So let me explain. Sometimes in our lives, we might compare ourselves to people with even more magnificent wealth than us. I mean, some of us have more or less wealth, but usually there's going to be someone you can compare yourself with where you're like, wow, that person's really got it good. So look at the person living, in a mansion on the hill, and you might say, compared to them, I feel like I'm a little bit broke, or I don't have as much expendable income. I can't just on a whim take a flight somewhere and spend the weekend there or something like that. I don't know. Maybe that is your situation or not, but just imagine that in our system anyway, you can compare your wealth against others and feel relatively poor. But now we're talking about absolute poverty, meaning by any human standard of what you need, you don't have enough. Food, clothing, and shelter. These things are not just items of luxury. Like I can just go without food for a while and save money. These are absolute necessities. So we in the first world industrialized nations don't get to see the full scale of human poverty as it exists in the third world. Because if you're living in absolute poverty, you're constantly hungry, you're fighting off starvation. Also in parts of the world where this kind of condition persists, there's low literacy, there's poor public sanitation. So people are also fighting off all kinds of opportunistic diseases, infections, and things like that. And some people, it's hard to bring them to feel some sympathy for the poor in the third world. Some might say, well, isn't that the fault of their lack of industriousness or their deficient government structure or whatever? So they bear the responsibility for their own condition. Maybe some say this, but it's hard to say those kinds of things about little children, right? I mean, little children born into this world certainly have no ability to control where they're born or what circumstances they're born into. And so it's not just like able-bodied adults who didn't work hard enough who are all poor and starving. We're talking about children that are dying of starvation too. And it's like 14 million and up die each year from a lack of adequate nutrition, basically starvation. So we in the first world industrialized nations, we don't get to see the full scale of human poverty. Who are the poorest of the poor living in our own country and in our own streets? Well, the homeless, So some of you, I'm sure, have probably seen the homeless. You go to like a homeless encampment or a Skid Row area and you can see people living in the extremities of poverty in the United States. But he makes a point, Singer, that if you compare the conditions of our homeless population and poor people to the conditions of poverty in the third world, there's levels to this poverty, and they're really not comparable. Because even people in like the United States living as a homeless person are not generally starving to death. You don't see people walking around looking like skeletonized like they may in certain places like in the plains of West Africa where real extreme depths of poverty can be seen. So there's enough surplus wealth and social assistance programs for a person that's living as a homeless individual in the United States to at least meet their basic nutritional daily needs and not go into a state of starvation. So he just reminds us that even if we have seen some measure of poverty, it takes a little bit more effort for you to recognize how bad it can be in the third world, because you have to turn your attention towards it, and it's not necessarily served up to us each day in our domestic news media, which is more preoccupied oftentimes with issues of interest to the American public and that have to do with our own internal political affairs and so on. So absolute poverty is poverty by any human standard, unlike relative poverty, and it kills, makes people miserable, shortens their lives. So Peter Singer sees himself as a utilitarian when it comes to ethics. So now that we've learned about utilitarianism, we're in a position to understand what he means. He thinks, therefore, that the right action is always whichever action or policy would generate the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. And since absolute poverty kills, makes people miserable, makes their lives difficult and painful and short, he would see this as a major, perhaps the primary source of human misery on the planet. And so if maximizing overall human happiness and pleasure is the goal of ethics, like utilitarianism says, then he says this absolute poverty should be something that is a direct threat to the maximization of happiness, and therefore anyone with utilitarian principles should want to do something to improve on the status quo. So we should be attacking absolute poverty based on our motivation to promote the most overall happiness for the greatest number of people. This is a counterweight to human happiness. This drags human happiness down and replaces it with misery and unhappiness and pain. So that's kind of his underlining premise. He's a utilitarian. Absolute poverty is bad. It makes people miserable. And if we could do something about it, and he thinks we can, then we should, because the status quo is unacceptable. Now, he makes another point that follows after this. Now, in philosophy, as you guys have already, I guess, discovered, there's oftentimes the heavy use of hypothetical scenarios, thought experiments, like imagine the guy's in the woods and he sees a sphere, or imagine there was an island, the greatest conceivable island. Sometimes I know that as you're starting to learn philosophy, a beginning student can find some of those kind of examples frustrating. It might sound like, well, how far removed from this is from real life? How can it really relate to the circumstances of my life? As a philosopher, I don't think there's any problem with these kind of hypothetical scenarios. They're really just given to help you focus on principles within an argument. But to those that find them a little bit off-putting, maybe this is an essay that doesn't have that same feature, because we're not talking about hypothetical scenarios in this case. This human misery from absolute poverty is the real world fact, and it's a persistent background condition. It's not something that comes and goes. Today I'm looking out the window and I'm seeing rain. So weather sometimes is nice and sometimes it's not nice. When it's a stormy day, the sun will come back tomorrow or sometime. But it's not like that with absolute poverty. It's not something that takes a break. So it's here sometimes and then once in a while it clears up and it's gone for a little while. No, it's always there. It's a persistent condition. We just don't sometimes turn our attention to it and focus on it. But if we want to, it'll be there for us to notice. So don't assume everything's going well, the author says, when it just seems like we're having a normal, smooth day in our own country and there's no news reports of like some aviation accident or we had a good day with COVID or something. Okay, so the next thing he says is this. The problem of absolute poverty and hunger, he says it's not a problem of scarcity of resources. Instead, he says it's a problem of poor distribution and waste of the available resources. So let me write the point here and then we'll explain a little bit. This is Singer's claim that he's saying. So the problem of global poverty or hunger is not a problem of scarcity of resources. Instead, he says, it is a problem of poor distribution and waste of available resources. Okay, so let me explain this point now. At this juncture of the argument, because you can kind of see where it's headed, he's saying we are in the first world living in abundance. There's like over 1 billion people around the globe that are living in total poverty, starving almost. All their money goes to the basic necessities and they don't even have enough for those basic necessities. So, it's like he's setting up an argument where we should do more to help those people. But now a critic might mention this as a point of rebuttal. Imagine a critic who says this, well, you know what, though, Singer? The thing is, this is a problem, sure, but it can't be solved. It's futile to try and solve it. It's impossible to solve it. So I'm absolved from all responsibility for doing anything because there's nothing I can do. Some people might say this, basically, that we live in a world where we have a huge human population, and the population is much larger than the amount of food that we have to feed everybody. So that's where someone might say there's just a scarcity of available resources. Therefore, it will never be the case that everyone gets enough to eat. Because when you have too many people and not enough food, basically, then some people are inevitably going to not have enough. There's a little game maybe some of you have ever played or heard about from your days in elementary school called musical chairs. Okay, now it's just an analogy, but follow me here. In musical chairs, people walk around the chairs, and there's a number of people, but there's more people than chairs. And when the music stops, everyone's supposed to try and take a seat. But of course, someone is the odd person out that didn't get seated fast enough, and then they're not one of the winners of the game. So when you have too many people, not enough chairs, not everyone gets a seat. Okay, well, if you have too many people and not enough food, then you could argue in a similar sense, some people are just bound to receive less or just nothing or not enough. But Peter Singer says, no, I don't agree. Not true. It's not just that there's literally not enough available resources. Instead, he says the real problem is the way we poorly distribute, mismanage, and waste the available consumable resources that we could have. And he says this for two reasons, okay? One of them might sound like you expect this because I told you he wrote a book about animals and vegetarianism, but he makes a point that's been well confirmed, I think, by research, and that is this. Because of the heavy emphasis and the central role that animal agriculture plays in the Western diet, how much meat basically that we all consume, that actually produces huge inefficiency in the diversion of consumable resources to people. Basically, if we ate less meat, then the amount of consumable resources that we have to give to livestock, cattle, and other farm animals to bring them up to the market for consumption for the consumer, the same amount of consumable resources that have to be diverted to these animals could more efficiently be given to human beings directly, and that would feed many more people. So what research seems to show is that if there was, let's say, like some major movement towards vegetarianism in the West, then there would be enough additional surplus food generated by that change to feed an even larger global population than the one that we do have now of like 6 or 7 billion. Now, he's not saying that because he really believes it's realistic for the world to have mass conversion to vegetarianism and fix the problem of global hunger in that way. But he does want to make the point that it's not inconceivable, it's not theoretically impossible for us to make changes either individually or at the level of society that would at least improve upon or make a dent in the status quo. So he basically doesn't want to allow us to absolve ourselves from responsibility for making changes by saying that we are in a futile situation where it cannot be improved upon. So it's not necessarily scarcity. One thing is the reliance that we have on animal agriculture, which results in inefficient distribution of consumable resources. There's also waste. That's the other thing. So a lot of food actually just goes straight to the landfill in the Western world because the consumer habits that we have, a lot of times we buy things that we don't end up eating. Sometimes we purchase a lot of food in the pantry that goes into the trash because it spoils. In other cases, we order a lot of things at a restaurant and we end up not being able to clear our plate. So if we were a little bit more modest and frugal with our consumer habits and consumption, and if we de-emphasize the central role of animal agriculture in our diet, then we would have the ability perhaps to meet these needs. So he says, let us not just say there is never enough food and there never could be. That's one thing that he makes a point of rebuttal for. Okay, now after that, he kind of switches gears and he wants to start talking a little bit about absolute affluence. So he's talked about poverty. And again, he's trying to make the case that the poverty and hunger experienced in the third world could be somewhat ameliorated if a transfer of wealth or resources from the first world to the third world were to be effected. And that kind of wealth that could be transferred does exist. And that's when he brings up the term absolute affluence. So we heard about absolute poverty. Absolute affluence is just the other side of the coin. And the definition of it is similar, but it's just the converse. So absolute affluence is having more than enough income or wealth to meet the same basic needs of food, clothing, and shelter. Okay, that's absolute affluence. And based on the way the term is defined here, this categorizes and all of us, we fall within this definition according to how it is specified. Meaning that for any of us, after we use our income and wealth to secure the basic needs, the things we have to eat, the clothes that we need to wear, the place where we sleep at night, each of us still have money left over to spend on any number of non-essential purchases that we just want rather than need. So I mean, certainly speaking for myself, I could attest to that. After I've paid rent, have all my clothes in order, have food in the fridge, I'm still able to spend money on even just this watch that I'm wearing right now. This is like a nice watch. It's a Garmin Fenix 6. It's like over $1,000 watch. I guess I already had a different watch, and you don't necessarily need a watch to live or to survive. So here I am spending money on non-essential things over and beyond the basic necessities. If I buy a PlayStation 5 this summer, which I definitely want to do, That's another one of those kinds of purchases of not something that I necessarily need, but just want for my own entertainment or pleasure. And we're all in that same boat. I mean, the case may be different from person to person, but whether it's a new outfit, new pair of shoes that you just want to have because they look cool, not because you literally don't have any other pair of shoes, or video games, entertainment. I mean, some of these things we're not doing right now, but you all understand: concerts, movies, travel opportunities, vacations, another car, or whatever the case may be, even just jewelry and stuff like that. So we live in absolute affluence, basically. And therefore, we are on the total reverse side of this haves and have-nots that's being described in the paper. After securing basic necessities, we still have additional affluence and money left over to spend on things that we want but don't need. So look at the contrasts between these two sides again, he says. We live in a society, and according to means, where we have income beyond basic necessities. But we have over 1 billion people in the world living in such a case where they don't have enough income to even meet those same basic necessities. So he describes again how dire the circumstance is for those in absolute poverty. In 1993, the dollar amount of per capita income for those that are living in absolute poverty was $200 US. Now that's a strikingly tiny amount of money. But let's consider the rate of inflation over the past 28 years. Given that, maybe the number would translate more to something like $400 today. So I'm just doubling it. But even if that were so, this is a tiny, meager amount of money for a person to use for an annual budget. Per capita income, we mean for a whole year. And imagine that, let's say it's like $365, roughly twice the amount mentioned in the paper, to account for the changed inflation of the dollar over the time period. If that was your budget for like 2021, someone said, here, make it stretch. You got $365 for 2021, now go. That'd be a very hard year for you, right? It'd be like living on $1 a day. What would you do? You'd have to do what people in the third world actually do, which is like band together in big communal living situations, maybe extended family members all pooling together their meager amounts of income and wealth to then purchase surplus amounts of consumable resources that could be carefully rationed off so that everyone can survive, things like rice, grains, legumes, and things of that kind. And when we say like $400 a year, don't misunderstand. That doesn't mean the amount of money that, the purchasing power you would have on the dollar at the rate of exchange in a foreign country. We're talking about the purchasing power of $1 US in the United States monetary system. So, because like a dollar in some countries, when you exchange it for the local currency, it goes quite far. Like I've been to India a few times, and a dollar when I was there was like 60 rupees, and you could buy like street food in some cases for like 10 rupees and stuff. So I mean, the dollar is quite powerful. You feel like you're rich as a Westerner traveling there and converting your money to the local currency. But we're instead saying the amount of purchasing power and value that this dollar would have relative to the United States purchasing power standard. So, I mean, that'd be very hard, living off of like $1 US per day for a whole year. So anyway, he says, and then again reminds us that to those people living in absolute poverty, we could transfer at least some of our surplus additional wealth that we would otherwise spend on ourselves to the poor without even threatening our basic well-being or welfare in any significant way. I've had a few friends that after college decided that they wanted to do something humanitarian and joined like the Peace Corps. And the stories that you hear from people who go out into some of these missions, so they'll go to like a hard-hit country in the world where people need humanitarian aid or educational assistance. In one case, I had a friend that went to Ghana for Peace Corps. And what she would tell me was a familiar story from a lot of other people that went, that when a Westerner shows up in some kind of humanitarian capacity, the local people there, especially little children and stuff, can automatically detect that you're a Westerner because of your manner of speech, dress, and everything else. And they'll like flock to these folks and say, hopefully they can give me some kind of candy or some type of gift, because we sort of represent like icons of wealth, even though we're just everyday citizens to ourselves in the West. So we kind of have magnificent wealth beyond comparison or beyond imagination to those that are living in absolute poverty. So he reminds us that we can transfer some of that surplus wealth without threatening our basic welfare. Now, how much is being transferred, if any, from the first to the third world for this purpose? That's what he speaks about next. So remember, he's writing the paper in 1993, and at that time, the United Nations had set a target goal for the wealthy industrialized countries to give. The United Nations target goal was 0.7% of gross domestic product. So gross domestic product, the annual economic output of a country. The modest goal the United Nations had set as a target was to set aside 0.7% of that gross domestic product, give it to a joint fund for international aid to the third world and global poverty. And then that would help to, at least improve on the situation a little. But how much was really given in comparison to the goal? Well, it's a modest and achievable goal, but even there, major nations fell short. So like the UK was at 0.31% of that goal. Germany, what was that? 0.41%. Japan, 0.32%. And the United States, the wealthiest nation of all, atop the pyramid of wealth in the whole planet, not the most generous, at least in this one metric, 0.15%. So us, the nation with the greatest ability to give, not giving the most, not hitting the achievable target. So he really then lays out this question, kind of a tough assessment, but he says, looking at this status quo, if we could give more than we're doing, and if that would help prevent preventable starvation and death in the third world, then is the withholding on aid anywhere on a moral par with killing? Because, of course, when you kill, you take an action, you commit an action that ends life on purpose. But it could be argued that in withholding assistance, where the assistance would have prevented a person's death, it has the same effect in the end. Withholding on aid, this person dies because they didn't get it. How is this different from killing the person? Well, let us take a step back from the breach. As soon as this is written, my reaction, and I'm sure many of you, is there's no real comparison between killing and failing to assist. They're different. I'm sure you would resist any comparison between your own moral record, if you don't perhaps give to aid, and that of an actual killer. And I would agree with you. But what is the difference, though, between killing and failing to assist? So that's the next question that Peter Singer wants to put on the table and try and analyze. In fact, he himself is going to eventually concede the point. He knows that killing is not the same thing as failing to assist, and that it's worse. But he still wants to try and show that even if killing is worse than the failure to assist, that doesn't remove all the blame from the failure to assist. It is still in some significant way wrong, even if, fair enough, killing is even worse and more wrong. So the next part of this discussion is where he's going to actually list out what he thinks are the main differences between killing and failing to assist. And then after having listed them, he will go back through them one by one to try and show the reader why he still thinks that failure to assist is wrong, even if it is perhaps, albeit not as bad as killing would be. This is the thing that a philosopher often will do if they're very thorough and detail-oriented, which Peter Singer is. He is trying to anticipate the objections of a critic before they make the objections. So that means he will show recognition of their rebuttal and then try and give a counterpoint to it. It's kind of like, imagine yourself as a lawyer, right? If you're a lawyer, then you have to think, what will the opposing counsel on the other side say and argue? And I will try and present those arguments in anticipation of what they will say so that I can defend against those arguments. Like you might say to the jury, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, the prosecution is going to tell you that our defendant had every motive and means. And then they will try and say, here's the argument they will give as they state their rebuttal. So Peter Singer says, to my critics, they're going to say there's no comparison between killing and failing to assist. They're way different. So he's going to show recognition of these stated differences first, and then he'll go back through them and try and report on why they don't, eliminate all the wrongness of the failure to assist. So the heading for our next little part of the notes is differences between killing and failing to assist. Okay, differences between killing and failing to assist. In the end, he's going to list 5 of these different points. So let's go through them if we can. First of all, one difference between the two is difference of motivation. Difference of motivation. Okay, so let's compare these two examples. One who sets out with the full intention to kill people, and as many as they can, like a mass shooter type person. And compare that against just one of us, me or you, who, for example, goes out to the mall and buys some nice outfit or an expensive meal and treat ourselves, getting yourself something nice instead of giving it to the poor. Okay, so withholding on aid but spending on yourself. Compare that case to the killer. Now let's start with the killer. This, hypothetical, there's real people like that too, unfortunately, but imagine a hypothetical case of a person, going out to kill people with a big weapon in a public place. What's that person's motivation? Like, what do they want to have happen? Why are they doing it? Well, their motivation, unfortunately, is clear and it's very disturbing, but it's the motivation to end life. This person wants to cause death. They want to commit actions that will directly cause death. So that's an evil, malicious, completely wrong motive to have, but that's what it is. The killer's motive is to cause the end of human life. But if I'm sitting there, or you or me or any of us in this class are sitting there like, dining at a really fancy restaurant where we, blow a lot of money on it, what's your motive? Is it to hurt people? Is it to see or cause some person out there to die? When you don't give money to the international poor and you just spend it on yourself, what motive is in mind? Is it the thought, I'm going to, people might die because of this and that's why I'm doing it? What is the real motive? It's not that motive, as I'm hoping you can agree. But maybe you could put a fine point on it in the chat. What would you say is the motive of any of us who just goes out and as a consumer and buys things for ourselves instead of giving any of it to the poor? What's the motive? Is it the motive of the killer? Do you go out to the restaurant like, these people will die while I eat, ha ha? No, it's just pleasure. That's right, Brandon. It's just self-interest. It's just the enjoyment and the pleasure that comes from whatever it is that you spent the money on. So when you're sitting there with like, a new video game or a PS5, I know that you're not thinking in your mind, ha ha, sticking it to the poor again, let them starve while I play these games, and that's the real enjoyment I'm getting from it. No, you don't. A normal person, it would never cross their mind. You just think of the item, the fact that you want it, and the pleasure that you'll get out of using it. So we say here that you cannot compare the two motives, and that's why we can say there's a real difference between killing and failing to assist. The killer has an evil motive, but when you fail to assist, the motive's not evil at all. It's just the pursuit of your own happiness, okay? So that's one difference. Here's another one. I don't know, to me, and whenever I present the second one, maybe I just have a dark sense of humor, but it's a little funny almost. So the second one, it is not hard to avoid killing. But on the other hand, it is very hard to save all the lives that you can. Okay, not hard to avoid killing, but it is hard, very hard, to save all the lives that you can. And so someone in this case could say again that killing and failing to assist cannot possibly be compared. They're not on a par. They're not equivalent. And why not? Because take measure of the two obligations that we are being claimed to have. One obligation, not to kill people. Okay, easy, done. It's very easy to not kill people. If that's the obligation here, it's easy to live up to. But the other so-called obligation is to assist people by means of international aid. And you could say that's not so easy. So let's go over this really quick. I'm going to make a little assumption about everyone in this class, and I think it's a safe assumption, but I'm just going to go out on a limb and assume that none of you here have ever killed another person. So pretend you've never killed another person or whatever, haven't killed a person yet. I hope you never do. If not, then you can probably easily relate to this. To this point in your life, has it been hard for you to not kill people? Is it something that's difficult to not do? Do you constantly struggle with homicidal thoughts that you have to set to the side and repress? I really hope not. If you're just a normal, well-adjusted person like most, then I'm sure it's the easiest thing ever to not kill people. In fact, what do you have to do to not kill people? How much effort does that take? Well, I'll just tell you, it takes no effort at all. Literally, you don't have to do anything. It takes inaction. Just don't get up and mind your own business and leave people alone. And that's all you have to do to not kill people. Think about it. Right now, you're not killing anyone. There's billions of people and you're not killing any of them. So it's easy. On the other hand, though, giving money, aid, time to save lives in the third world. Does that require that you just sit back and just not interfere with people's lives and leave them alone? No, that doesn't require that you just leave people alone and don't do anything. That requires that you do something or a lot of things, and maybe over a sustained time period. So not killing is easy. It just means leave people alone, but going out to assist people requires action, not inaction. So there's another case where you can say the two moral obligations being foisted upon me are not equivalent, because one is easy to discharge. Not killing is very easy to do. Just consider your own example. But assisting people is difficult, and it takes time, money, effort, and it might require that over a duration of time. Okay, so here's another point that might be seen as a clear difference between the two things, killing and failing to assist. Okay, so another difference, there's 5 in total. The third one he mentions is difference of certainty of the outcome. Difference of certainty of the outcome. Okay, so let's consider something. It's a little disturbing to understand this, but it's just, you got to face reality. With the access that people have to certain kind of high-powered weapons, and you know, if a person really wanted to, and they had the full intention and the motivation and the means to kill people or to hurt people, let's say a shooter, because Singer uses the example of a shooter, so I'm just kind of using his own example. But it's easy to relate to that because it's sad to say we've had too many public shootings and mass shootings over the last 20 years or so. But anyway, take that example of like a shooter person. They've got the means, the motive, they've been plotting an attack, you know. So what do you say is the percentage likelihood that, given those facts, this person will actually kill or hurt somebody? Well, the number's got to be very, very high. And that's just a sad thing, but we're kind of like sitting ducks, right? If somebody wanted to go into a public place with a gun and kill people, it's very hard to do anything until they've already started shooting. Obviously, they have the element of surprise. They could have been plotting the attack in advance for a long time. And so it's not like everyone has guns trained on each other like in the Old West, you know? So if this person starts popping off shots, then everyone's just going to be in a panic and running for cover, and they're going to be at a loss because you've got the element of surprise. So basic takeaway here is, sad to say, but if someone wants to kill, they have a very, very high probable chance that they can do it. The only thing holding them back is, like, you know, their own psychological inhibitions against it. Isn't that sad? We're kind of all like at the mercy of these psychopaths. I mean, if somebody wanted to kill me, you know, they could do it easily, and there's nothing I could do about it. So we just kind of have to hope for people with goodwill to exist. Anyways, though, I guess that's one of the benefits of no longer being in the physical classroom, no more school shootings. Those were getting pretty bad before the pandemic, but of course now more people are dying from the pandemic. Anyway, difference of certainty of the outcome. The long story short is that if a person is going to kill and they set their mind to it, it's almost dead certain that some people are going to be harmed because of that. But let's take the other case, the failure to assist case. If you or I don't give any charity money or donation to the third world poor, you can always say, well, it's not so clear to me that that actually is going to lead to anybody's harm. If I go out with a gun trying to kill people, definitely that's going to lead to people's harm. But if I just withhold on giving money to charity, you can always have some room for doubt that the charity money would have even been effectively distributed. For example, you can be skeptical as to whether they would have wasted the money on overhead or administrative costs. Or maybe they would have diverted it to a program or a initiative that doesn't end up helping anybody. Like maybe they fix a well in a part of the third world in a village, but nobody lives in the village anymore. So they spent all this money, but it's not actually having any kind of humanitarian impact. So you can always have doubts that the money that you could have donated would have really helped anybody in the first place. Therefore, in withholding aid, it's not so certain that that's going to lead to the harm of any specific person. But in setting forth to kill, I mean, clearly that is much more likely and more certain to produce a deadly outcome for somebody. Okay, so that's another difference here. And there's 2 more, so I'm going to erase the top part so I can at least write another up here. Another difference mentioned after that is identifiability of the victim. Identifiability of the victim. So if a person goes out and shoots like a shooter, then they create victims, those who they've shot and killed. And it's definitely obvious that there's a clear and direct line of responsibility from the act of the shooter to the death of the victim. No one can say this person's dead, but it's not the shooter's fault. I mean, by definition, if the shooter shoots the person, then they are dead because of them. And it's no one else's fault but theirs. But suppose that you don't give money to charity, right? There's no way that we can ever trace a direct line between you specifically not giving aid and some particular person in the third world dying of starvation, right? It's not like we can say, hey, you withheld on aid, so this individual is dead because of your particular action, right? There's no way we can draw a line between you walking past the charity bucket, not dropping money into it, and then like a child dying in the third world later that day or the next day. It's not as if the money would have been earmarked for a particular person anyway. It just goes into a joint pool of funds that the administrators of the aid program will then disperse according to the priorities of the agency or organization. So again, a person who kills particular victims, and it's definitely their specific fault that those people have come to harm. But when you withhold on aid, even though there are going to be poor people in the world that starve on any given day, there's no similar manner of directly connecting some randomly chosen citizens withholding on aid to a specific death anywhere in the world on the basis of poverty or hunger. So another difference, you can say killing and failing to assist aren't the same, because a killer, when they kill people, it's their fault that they're gone. When you withhold on aid, we can't really point out anybody that is the specific victim of your choice not to decline to aid. Okay, and then there's just one more. I mean, I guess we're getting a little close to the end here. So maybe I want to spend some time speaking about it when we resume on Friday, because there's 2 meetings on this lecture, on this essay, so it's all planned out. It's a little more detailed, so I gave us 2 meetings to cover it. There's plenty of time to finish, but just while we're on this point, to have clarity and comprehensiveness, there's one more difference that he mentions, and that is this. You can always say it's not my fault that they're poor. You can always say it's not my fault that they're poor. But the killer, of course, the shooter, can't say it's not my fault they're dead. By definition, if the shooter is killing them, then it is that person's fault. But on the other hand, you or I, we're born into a world where poverty already exists. So it's not like we brought it into existence or it's our fault. If you are born into a world where poverty was already there before you, then you could say it's not my responsibility to clean up the problem or to fix the problem because I didn't directly cause it. What I'm responsible for morally are fixing problems that I am at fault for. So like if I destroy someone's property or commit a crime against them, or if I kill somebody, of course, then I'm at fault and I should be held accountable for whatever penalties or redress that's appropriate. But if there are problems that exist in the world which I have not caused, like there's a fire burning somewhere but I didn't set the fire, I'm not responsible for putting the fire out either. So imagine that this world we're living in, you were never born. I mean, I'm glad that you were born, but just, contemplate this scenario for a minute. It's like our class is happening and all the other students are here, but your parents never met, so you never existed. If you never were born, would there still be all the poor people? Yes. It's not like your birth changed that situation at all. So whether you were born or not, they would have still existed. And therefore, you can argue, how can I be held accountable to fix a problem that pre-exists my own birth and that my own existence makes no difference to? If I kill people, that's on me. But there's poor people where they're starving, and that's not my fault, so I don't have any obligation to assist. So that's another point of difference that could be made in terms of responsibility for acts versus responsibility for a standing status quo. But anyway, there's more to say. Remember that Peter Singer is the one who says we do have an obligation to assist the poor. So despite these claimed differences, he's going to come back and say, but still though, it's not good to withhold on aid, and we still should be obligated to do that. So hold on for the part 2 on Friday. For now, I guess I'll let you guys go. But thanks again for being here, and thanks for turning in your essays. Let me know in the chat that you're all good, and from there, I guess I'll close the stream and I'll see you back on Friday. We're all right? Everyone's good to go? Let's just make sure. Okay, perfect. Then thank you guys. Have a good one, and I will see you back in a couple of days. Until then, take it easy. Okay, bye-bye.